Let's open a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you for this day. We pray that you'll bless our time together today. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, folks, we're getting started. If you need to keep talking, go outside, please. Well, today we're going to talk about fault lines. We're sort of in the process of reordering where we put things up. Excuse me, Bill, could you close the door back there, please? If somebody close the door, thank you. And so some of these sites we're still using. We are up on Rumble, but sometimes I find Rumble a little bit hard to use and to find things. So we're definitely on YouTube and Facebook until they ban us. So there are a couple subjects we just won't talk about on YouTube because it's just not worth losing the channel over because we use it for our regular weekly teachings. We talk each week. So if you will be patient with us, we'll get all of our stuff reordered and a new thing put in place with an app and that type of thing. So hopefully that'll be ready within the next couple of months. Just pray for us as we're all volunteers. And it's a big project that we're hiring a vendor, but it's still a lot of work for a lot of people. So if you just be patient with us, and hopefully one of those things will be a new place for an MP3 file. We're not on Blog Talk Radio anymore because the person that's been doing that is not uploading them. So we're going to have to try to reinstitute some kind of MP3. And I'll try to be better about posting on Remnant Truth Network. So each week we talk about the convergence of events and the just rather insane, crazy things that are going on in the world as we get closer to the Lord's return. So let me just read a couple passages that I think are appropriate. One of the usual passages that we read a lot these days is 2 Timothy chapter 3, this know also that in the last days perilous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. From such turn away. For of this sort are they which creep into houses and lead captive silly women laden with sins, led away with divers lusts, ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. The last couple of weeks I've closed with an admonition that Paul gave in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, that people are to stand firm in the faith and act like men. That is an admonition for the church. A friend sent me an interesting note that I thought I would share today, that there was also this in the Old Testament. King David, at the end of his life, he told in 1 Kings chapter 2, he told Solomon to be strong and show yourself a man. Keep the charge of Yahweh, your God, to walk in his ways according to what is written in the law of Moses. Paul would have known that, and Paul adopted that and moved it over to the church. Paul himself was known for his boldness. In Acts chapter 17, Paul went to Athens. And I'll just read a little bit of this. This is one of my favorite passages. And I think if I was looking at interpreting it, I would say this is, I think, one of the most misused passages in the modern evangelical church. Because everybody says, well, Paul was just trying to get along with them and that type of thing. Now, listen, it's not what Paul was doing. But I see a lot of preachers and teachers saying stuff like that, and it's just not true. Now, while Paul waited for them in Athens, his spirit was stirred within him when he saw the city wholly given to idolatry. That's Acts chapter 17. Now I'm at verse 17. Therefore disputed he in the synagogue with the Jews and with the devout persons, and in the market daily with them that met with him. Do you see what he did? He didn't just say, well, let's all get along, let's just find common ground, let's work this out, and he disputed with them. The word there means disputed. Then certain philosophers of the Epicureans and of the Stoics encountered him, and some said, what will this babbler say? Others some, he seemeth to be a setter forth of strange gods, because he preached unto them Jesus and the resurrection. They seem to go together. And they took him and brought him unto Areopagus, saying, may we know what this new doctrine whereof thou speakest is? For thou bringest certain strange things to our ears. We would know, therefore, what these things mean. Then there's a parenthetical. For all the Athenians and strangers which were there spent their time in nothing else, but either to tell or to hear some new thing. Sounds very much like the world today. And what you're going to find, if you study the first century church, you're going to find that the pattern of what happened to the first century church is going to be what the pattern is for the church in the last days. So then Paul stood up in the midst of Mars Hill and said, ye men of Athens, I perceive that in all things ye are too superstitious. Again, does that sound like he's just playing intellectual patty cake with them? No. For as I passed by and behold your devotions, I found an altar with this inscription to the unknown God, whom ye therefore ignorantly worship, him I declare unto you. God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, dwelleth not in temples made with hands. Neither is he worshipped with man's hands as though he needed anything, seeing he giveth to all life and breath and all things. And hath made of one blood all nations of men to dwell on the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation, that they should seek the Lord, if haply they might feel after him and find him, though he be not very far from every one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as certain also of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. For as much then as we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the Godhead is like unto gold or silver or stone, graven by art and man's device. And the times of this ignorance God winked at, but now commandeth all men everywhere to repent. Again, what Paul said was, guys, the full final revelation of God is here in Jesus Christ, his Son, who died, buried, and rose again for your salvation. And the times of ignorance are over. That does not sound like a seeker-sensitive approach to these things. Sometimes the example is act like a man and stand up to this nonsense. Why? Because in verse 31 it says this, because he hath appointed a day in which he will judge the world in righteousness by that man whom he had ordained, whereof he hath given assurance unto all men, in that he hath raised him from the dead. And when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, and others said, we will hear thee again of this matter. So Paul departed from among them. Howbeit, certain man clave unto him, and believed, among them which was Dionysius the Areopagite, and a woman named Damaris, and others with them. In fact, my understanding is in Athens today, in this area, you can find a street named Dionysius after this man who repented and became a believer. Almost 2,000 years later. Incredible story. So today, we're going to, I did a midweek update this week. It didn't help because I've got too much again. So I'm going to knock out on my presentation here for a second because I moved something because I didn't know where it went, and it turned out I had it in the right place all along. Now I have to just see if I can find the thing again. Yes, here it is. Now, I'm going to cite some secular sources and that type of thing today, but I think that I think you'll get the point. Because even secular people are looking at what's going on in the world and culture and saying something's not right. And these are people that would laugh at and mock Christians for some of the beliefs that we hold. But something is going on. The world is, I use the title Fault Lines for a purpose. The world is fracturing. And by the way, I just want to acknowledge a man that I knew and respected quite a bit, Danny Isom, who has, he worked with Moriel, edited a number of Jacob's books, but himself was a wonderful Bible teacher. You can find some of his teachings on the internet. He also had a website called walkwiththeword.org, walkwiththeword.org. Wrote some great books, one of which I really like a lot because of the way he really exegetes the scripture in. And he may come to a different conclusion than you on timing of certain things, but I think it's a book to read. And Then the End Will Come is the title of it. Danny Isom, I-S-O-M. He went to be with the Lord either Friday or yesterday. He had suffered many years, but the Lord took one of the good teachers home. If you want excellent small group Bible studies, walkwiththeword.org will be a good resource for you. So, here we go. Here is, I don't know where to begin because there are people that are tearing the world down. They're causing the earthquakes. They're making more fault lines, whatever. So this is an article from Arab News today, aboard the net zero bandwagon, because this is what these environmentalists want to do. They want to get to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. So you can see where we are on the left side of the graph. And here is a bigger version of it. And so they want to get down to where there's net zero carbon emissions. This is, in my opinion, this is lunacy. I love when I was in Colorado a couple years ago, I took a picture of the license plate of a Tesla roaring by. They go from 0 to 60 in about 2 to 2.3 seconds. I got to get one of those. There's nothing like getting to 60 by the end of the block in your neighborhood. But it had a license plate on it called Zero Carb. And I thought, now Teslas are pretty expensive. And so you would assume that you got to be kind of smart to make enough money to buy that. And then the guy puts a zero carb thing on his. He has a zero carb license plate, which is just, a Tesla is not zero carb. Not in the manufacturing process or in the power that you need to charge the battery. But some of the things they talk about, they're going to get rid of, carbon or coal-fired power plants by 2021. And it is 2021, I know. This is just, everything on here is just absolute lunacy. It's just not going to happen. Plus, what about all the people in Africa that want air conditioning? I guess it doesn't matter to the elites like Gavin Newsom, who said that people in California, because of water drought and power, you should turn off your air conditioning and not take showers or baths. So maybe there is something good about that social distancing, because, and then they're having record heat again in the southwest and up into the northwest. I heard Death Valley hit 130 degrees the other day. The all-time record temperature ever recorded on Earth, where they have a good reading, was 134 degrees. And there's some thinking that they could challenge that. In fact, here's a upcoming western U.S. heat wave could be the hottest ever recorded on Earth. That's taking place this weekend. Record temperatures in Las Vegas and elsewhere in the Southwest. There's a study, and I'm going to repeat some of the things I talked about in my midweek update just to put things in context. But Reason Magazine reported on a study done by a couple professors at the University of Leeds that say to stop climate change, Americans must cut energy use by 90%, live in 640 square feet, and fly only once every 3 years. Now, I'm sure that these guys from England will abide by this, and if somebody invites them to come talk about their nonsensical paper. The new study is called Socioeconomic Conditions for Satisfying Human Needs at Low Energy Use. Reason Magazine says this: Vogel and his colleagues are undaunted by the fact that there are absolutely no examples of low-energy societies providing decent living standards as defined by the researchers themselves for their citizens. So what we have with these people on the left, they want to build this utopia. They want to build heaven on earth. And I guess they're going to do it sort of by alchemy, where you can turn lead into gold by magic. This has been, we've talked about this around here at FBC ever since our beginning 8 years ago. We also found that a fair income distribution, one of the co-authors said, is crucial for achieving decent living standards at low energy use. To reduce existing income disparities, governments could raise minimum wages, provide a universal basic income, and introduce a maximum income level. We need much higher taxes on high incomes and lower taxes on low incomes. And here's an interesting chart that I found. To get to zero carbon by 2050, you have to get to that energy use at the left, that red line. So follow that red line up and see, so that the blue ones are decent living standards have been met, and the others, decent living standards, are not met. That's in the yellow. So my question is, at that level, if you go up, there's no blue country that has decent living standards met is before that line. They all go beyond that line in use. And even a lot of other countries where they have not met those standards, like Russia, Iran, Latvia, China, Turkey, Brazil, they're above the carbon emissions needed to get to 2030 to get to zero net carbon by 2050. It's insane. But people are going to believe this stuff. There's a reason for it. Now, I'm going to cite an article by Andrew Sullivan. Listen, Andrew Sullivan is a gay man. He used to write for the New York Times, He was sort of forced out because they thought he was becoming or was a conservative, and he bounces around on the political spectrum. He would consider himself a classic liberal these days. But I think what he says is interesting. First of all, this was a tweet that he did this week. The last few weeks of mainstream media disinformation is compressed. CR2 is a right-wing bugaboo. They can't even define it. CRT is legal theory. It's not in K-12 classrooms. We don't even teach this. We don't even know what you're talking about. CRT just teaches the history of slavery and racism. You oppose that? And then CRT is necessary in our number one prioritized framework through which we teach all subjects. New York Times had an op-ed this week, the misguided bans on critical race theory. And it's a difficult question. What do? You don't want to ban free speech. But what happens is that the people that are pushing it, I don't have a problem with people teaching critical race theory or critical theory. It's been around, it's not new. Critical theory came about before it even appeared in Harvard Law School back in the 70s. I studied critical theory in graduate school. It goes back to the latter part of the 19th century. Fabian socialism out of England. I don't have a clip, by the way. If you want to know what we talk about in my golf group, we talk about the nuttiness in the world. And one of the guys says, well, you live up in Olentangy School District now, don't you? And I said, yeah. He goes, well, there was a guy that got up at the school board the other night and just tore the school board apart on this subject. You should go to one of those meetings and talk too. So I looked it up. You can look it up, Olentangy, Ohio School Board, and go to their July 8th meeting, and there was a black man who spoke, was just down the road from me a ways, married to a white lady, has a 5-year-old daughter. He's upset. By the way, he used to play football at Ohio State. He was a wide receiver, Demetrius Stanley. Very articulate guy. And he went on he had 5 minutes to speak, and he just laid it out. Next lady got up to speak. She goes, I don't think Mr. Stanley was done, so I'm yielding my time to him, and he can have my 5 minutes. And the next person did that. Look it up. It's on YouTube. But they're gaslighting us. So Olentangy, Channel 4 in Columbus, calling Marshall. Good grief. They did a report, and they said, Olentangy School says they're not teaching critical race theory. And I believe, if I recall, what Mr. Stanley said, Demetrius Stanley said was, they're teaching my daughter to question all white people. Her mother is white. What is wrong with you people? They're even asking, she's 5 years old. They're asking her a question about, do you identify as a male or female? She should be thinking about Barbie dolls and playing. And you people are indoctrinating her. I don't remember if he said it, but the implication was, I'm supposed to do that. Keep your hands off my kid. I thought it was great. The Channel 4 people were pathetic. And so Olentangy, and then they got some Ohio State professor. Well, this came out of law schools, blah, blah, blah. So here, I'm going to give you a little thing to lay this out. Here is American Federation of Teachers president, I think her name is Randy Weingarten, who is addressing the issue of critical race theory and another issue. It's a few-minute clip, but I want you to lay out listen to what she says about this whole issue. She's president of the American Federation of Teachers.
The seat of our democracy was attacked by violent insurgents. Capitol Police officers were assaulted and overrun. This was not tourism, as one congressman described it. This was terrorism. The truth must not be obstructed. It must come out. That's why it was deeply disappointing that not enough Republican senators would join Democrats so that our country could establish a bipartisan, independent commission to investigate the January 6th attack.
She doesn't know truth.
So
That's
I
not
am
what
asking,
happened.
we are asking everyone who wants American democracy to endure, don't thwart this process. Let's discover the truth. Which brings me to another attempt to suppress the truth. The New Culture campaign, some lawmakers, and Fox News are using to distort history, limit learning, and stoke fears about our public schools. Let's be clear. Critical race theory is not taught in elementary schools or middle schools or high schools. It's a method of examination taught in law school and in college that helps analyze whether systemic racism exists, and in particular, whether it has an effect on law and public policy. But culture warriors are labeling any discussion of race, racism, or discrimination as CRT to try to make it toxic. They are bullying teachers and trying to stop us from teaching students accurate history. This harms students. These cultural warriors want to deprive students of a robust understanding of our common history. This will put students at a disadvantage in life by knocking a big hole in their understanding of our country and the world.
Okay. So look, what's going on? Andrew Sullivan, great article. You can find a free version of it at Real Clear Politics, and it's not called What Happens to You. I think it might be the subtitle, The Radicalization of the American Elite Against Liberalism. I would highly recommend that you read it and understand in context that Andrew Sullivan is not a person that would agree with Christian values because of his lifestyle and that type of thing. But I think he's a good thinker. And occasionally he, swerves into right things, and I think it should be applauded. So this is what happens. So he's a liberal, and he's just getting lambasted by people on the left on Twitter and elsewhere. I mean, he's just being slaughtered. And he goes, "What happened to you?" It's a question I get a lot on Twitter. When did you become so far right? Why have you become a white supremacist, transphobic, misogynistic eugenicist? Or, of course, see, I told you who he really was. Just take the hood off, Sully. It's trolling, mainly, Sully says. And it's a weapon for some in the elite world to wield against others in the kind of emotional blackmail spiral that was first pioneered on elite college campuses. But if it's worth answering, a year after I was booted from New York Magazine for my unacceptable politics, because it seems to me that the dynamic should really be the other way around. The real question is, what happened to you? The CRT debate is just the latest squall in a tempest brewing and building for 5 years or so. And yes, some of the liberal critiques of Fox News' hype campaign are well taken. Is this a wedge issue for the GOP? Of course it is. Are they using the term critical race theory as a cynical marketing boogeyman? Of course they are. Are some dog whistles involved? A few. Are crude bans on public servant speech dangerous? Absolutely. Do many of the alarmists know who Derek Bell was? Of course not. I do, by the way. And I would suspect that Demetrius Stanley, he knows. That guy is bright. And of course, I'm going to think he's even brighter because he agrees with me, but that's good. But does that mean there isn't a real issue here? Of course it doesn't. Take a big step back. Observe what has happened in our discourse since around 2015. Forget CRT for a moment and ask yourself, is nothing going on here but Republican propaganda and guile? Can you not see that the Republicans may be acting, but they are also reacting against something that is right in front of our noses? What is it? It is, I'd argue, the sudden, rapid, stunning shift in the belief system of the American elites. It has sent the whole society into profound cultural dislocation. It is, in essence, an ongoing moral panic against the specter of white supremacy, which is now bizarrely regarded as an accurate description of the largest, freest, most successful multiracial democracy in human history. We all know it's happened. The elites, increasingly sequestered within one political party and one media monoculture, educated by colleges and private schools that have become hermetically sealed against any non-left dissent, have had a social justice reckoning these past few years. And they have been ideologically transformed with countless cascading consequences. One example would be what happened down at Columbus Academy, an elite, really elite private school in the city of Columbus. It's down in Gahanna. $30,000 a year in Columbus to send your kid to school. Two mothers started going to the board, raising questions, asking for proof, challenging things that they thought were being taught to their kids because they asked their kids about them. They cared. One lives next to one of the board of trustees chairman. And guess what? They got a letter from Columbus Academy. We will not re-enroll your daughters in school because of your behavior. I think one of the daughters is going to be a junior in high school. Did the headmistress there at the school, does she care about the disruption to that kid's life? No, she doesn't. And I'll bet she makes a pretty good penny, like this president of the American Federation of Teachers she just saw. Do you know what she makes a year? I'll say $540,000. I actually think it's $560,000 a year. But if I said 560 and it was 540, then everyone said, well, you don't even know what you're talking about because she only makes 540, not 560. I guess $500,000 a year just doesn't get you people who can think anymore. Get you little propagandists who will get up in front of people and lie through their teeth. A large portion of what Andrew Sullivan writes about in his article comes from an article, If You Hate the Culture Wars, Blame Liberals, by Kevin Drum. I think it's at jabberwocky.com or something like that. If you go to Andrew Sullivan's article, you can find the link to it. Peggy Noonan talked about it also in her column Saturday, and she agreed with us, like, yeah, we're sort of missing the point here, which is, like, I suppose Peggy Noonan woke up a little bit. So here's what Kevin Drum says. On Thursday, I posted a series of charts that all documented a similar theme. Since roughly the year 2000, according to survey data. Now, remember what I've always said about how does these things develop prophetically? It's sort of similar to that discussion in one of Hemingway's book, I think The Sun Also Rises, where one guy asked another, how did you go bankrupt? And he said, well, I went two ways. Gradually, then suddenly. And this is how Bible prophecy unfolds. It unfolds gradually, then suddenly. Now, I'm not ascribing scriptural authority to Hemingway, but the point stands because we see this acceleration of Bible prophecy. It's one of the things I talked about in that Canadian conference, if you want to look it up. So he says this wasn't meant to be a rigorous scholarly analysis, and you can argue about margins of error, question wording, etc. Still, the gaps are too big and the trend too consistent to ignore the obvious conclusion that over the past 2 decades, Democrats have moved left far more than Republicans have moved right. Does that seem like it to you? It does. I mean, it's patently obvious. And here's some examples. So Democrats are increasingly pro-immigration, and it shows the change in percentages as to where they've moved. Share of respondents who say that immigrants strengthen our country because of their hard work and talents. And Republicans have stayed relatively the same. It's gone up a little bit, but it's really jumped up among Democrats. Here's some other examples, though. Democrats' view on legality of abortion from 1975 to 2020. And what you want to look at is the green line in the top chart. And essentially it says no legal under any circumstances, the percentage. So in 1975, 19% of Democrats believed that. Can you believe that? 1 out of 5. And now we come up to 2020, and it's 49%. So the percentage of Democrats who believe that abortion should be legal under any circumstances, partial birth and everything, has gone up 30 points. Down below, if you look at the Republicans, though, Republicans who think the traditional strong Republican conservative position would be illegal in all cases, it was 25% of Republicans in 1975, and today it's 27. So the Democrats in their position, unrestricted abortion, that's increased by 30 percentage points in the last 40 years, 35 years. The Republicans is increased by 2 percentage points. And you see the conclusion that Kevin Drum comes to, and then Andrew Sullivan and Peggy Noonan and others have picked up on. You can find it at National Review also. This is a huge change. Now here's another one, support for gay marriage by political party. So you see that in 1996, Democrats supported it by 33%. By 2021, it's 83%. That's a 50 percentage point increase during that period of time. Did Republicans stay with their 16%? No, they changed too. They went the Democrat way. They went from 16% to 55%. In other words, one way of looking at it is Democrat support for same-sex marriage is up by 50 points, and Republican support for traditional marriage is down 39 points. They moved 39 points away from the Republican position. Look at this in religion. Virtually no change among Republicans from 1998 to 2018, that 20-year period, but a pretty significant decline in Democrats. And then you look at this, you can see how the move has been away from your position. 0 would be everybody staying the same. And then above the line would be moving more towards your position. And below the line would be moving away from your traditional conservative position. There's also a chart in The Economist that does the same thing. So listen, this is what Kevin Drum concludes. I made this point many times before, and I want to make it more loudly and more plainly today. It is not conservatives who have turned American politics into a culture war. It is liberals. And this shouldn't come as a surprise. Almost by definition, liberals are the ones pushing for change, while conservatives are merely responding to whatever liberals do. More specifically, progressives have been bragging publicly about pushing the Democratic Party leftward since at least 2004, and they've succeeded. This is, by the way, this guy used to write for Mother Jones, which is a very left-wing oriented magazine. This guy's not a conservative who's making this. And so he asked the question for the hive mind, what conclusions can we draw from all of this? And one person in the first comment said, well, you can see that Democrats are smarter than Republicans. Yeah. So I would highly recommend both of these articles. But you can see how this has changed, my friends, because things happen that didn't happen before. I'm going to play you a clip, as painful as it will be to watch, from the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus. I'm sure you've seen it. You need to see it again. Don't let them disappear this thing from the internet. Don't let them go. They're all there. Oh, it was just a joke. It was a parody. Milo Yiannopoulos, who himself used to be gay, but says he is not now after encountering the Lord. Now, I'm just telling you what he says. A lot of people research the people in the picture. There are 4 sex offenders in that chorus. So let's just listen to what it is. This is what they put up on the internet. No one made them do this. And see if this is part of this trend.
You think we're sinful? You fight against our rights. You say we all lead lives you can't respect. But you're just frightened. You think that we'll corrupt your kids if our agenda goes unchecked. Funny, just this once, you're correct. We'll convert your children. Happens bit by bit, quietly and subtly, and you will barely notice it. Just like you worried, they'll change their group of friends. You won't approve of where they go at night to protest. Oh, and you'll be disgusted when they start finding things online that you've kept far from their sight. We'll convert your children, yes we will.
Reaching one and all, there's really no escaping it.
'Cause even grandma likes RuPaul.
And the world's getting kinder.
Gen Z's gayer than Grindr. We're coming for them.
We're coming for your children.
The gay agenda is coming home.
So you can judge for yourself whether they were just kind of joking. So Andrew Sullivan in his article points out that, listen, it's critical race theory. This is sort of where it's got the focus right now of this culture war. But it wasn't conservatives who changed it. Believe me, he's no fan of the former president. But he says, we're the most multicultural country ever in the history of mankind, and we're racist. This is a propaganda lie by the media, and they're all in on it. They all know. Now, the question is, do they know whether they're faking it and it's all about power? It doesn't make any difference. They're lying all the time. So you saw the video of the American Federation of Teachers president, and she was like, we don't teach radical. You saw her. We could imitate her. We don't teach critical race theory. Duh. The NEA this week, I'm trying to remember the name of the Pringle is the head of the NEA. They had a virtual meeting this week. New business item 39 adopted as modified. You have to take my word for it. I got this from the website. It's been scrubbed. You can find archived versions out there. They took it down. Well, let's look at some of the things that they say. So the AFT says, we don't teach critical race theory. I don't know what you're talking about. Olentangy School Board, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know why you're drawing these conclusions, Mr. Stanley, about what they're showing to your daughter. So here's what they said. Share and publicize through existing channels information already available on what? Critical race theory. This is what the NEA says they need to do in schools. Now, wait a minute. I thought they didn't teach it. Something's a little bit off here, don't you think? We're being gaslighted. That's what it's called. What is and what it is not. Have a team of staffers for members who want to learn more and fight back against anti-CRT rhetoric. If you're not teaching it, why are you fighting against it? The people who are against it. Just continue doing what you're doing, right? If you're not doing it. It's not so much critical race theory, it's the implementation of it through all these different practices. Provide an already created in-depth study that critiques empire, white supremacy, anti-blackness, anti-indigeneity, racism, patriarchy, cis heteropatriarchy. By the way, that's me. Capitalism, ableism, anthropocentrism, and other forms of power and oppression at the intersections of our society, and that we oppose attempts to ban critical race theory and or the 1619 Project. So who are you going to believe? American Federation of Teachers, who said, well, we don't do that, or the NEA, who says, we're going to push it even more. It is reasonable, appropriate for curriculum to be informed by academic frameworks and understanding and interpreting the impact on the past, on current society, including critical race theory. Join with Black Lives Matter at school and the Zen Education Project. Howard Zinn destroyed history education in America. He was a terrorist who sat at his desk and made stuff up. Remember George Floyd's birthday as a national day of action to teach lessons about structural racism and oppression. Conduct a virtual listening tour that will educate members on the tools and resources needed to defend honesty and education, including but not limited to tools like CRT. So that's why you end up with this math education stuff that if you demand a right answer, that's racist. If you insist that students be to class on time, that's racist. Who has the best interest of everybody at heart? It's obvious. And commit President Becky Pringle to make public statements across all lines of media that support racial honesty in education, including but not limited to critical race theory. And we need money to do this because it's going to cost us over $100,000. Maybe you can get a donation from the American Federation of Teachers out of her large salary. Raytheon has also come out with things. Christopher Rufo reports this and says, understand and share. This is through their critical race theory implementation indoctrination program for their employees, one of the largest, maybe the second largest defense contractor in the country. This is what they're teaching their employees. Understand and share what defund the police really means. And you saw Jen Zuckerberg, the Minister of Information for the Biden administration, got up there and said, it's the Republicans who want to defund the police. So I looked on the internet, I found a picture of Republicans marching to defund the police. Oh wait, that's not Republicans. Okay. Well, somebody's got their narrative completely devoid of facts, and I think it's Ms. Zuckerberg. And here's what Raytheon says: decolonize your bookshelf. Participate in reparations. One way is through this Facebook group. I guess this Facebook group doesn't get banned or blocked or limited. Find and join a local white space. And then they talk about establishing equity. You've seen this picture before. A quality of outcome or the quality of the experience by taking individual needs into account. So again, I'd highly recommend that you go read Andrew Sullivan's essay. He concludes with this: I am not making a tactical argument here. I'm making a deeper moral argument. We can and must still fight and argue for what we believe in, a liberal democracy and a liberal society. This fight will not end if we just ignore it or allow ourselves to be intimidated by it or join the tribal pile-ons. And I will not apologize for confronting this, however unpopular it might make me, just as I won't apologize for confronting the poison and nihilism on the right. This is where I would disagree with him. And if you really want to be on the right side of liberalism, you will join me. It's a good article, about 30-minute read. I would recommend it. So here's some other things that are going on. So much for getting this done quickly. The World Economic Forum had an exercise this week, and they're talking about cyber risk. This is the third one that they've had. It took place on Friday. You can find the videos of it on YouTube at Digital Reset. That's the name of the channel, Cyber Polygon. And of course, the intro to the Cyber Polygon was done by the infamous Klaus Schwab.
Address you for the second year in a row here at the Cyber Polygon. We have come together today to discuss how we can develop secure digital ecosystems and protect companies, but also societies, from cyber attacks. We must do so with a broader mission in mind, to improve the state of our digital world by enhancing, on the one hand, global cooperation, but also public-private cooperation. One of the lessons of the COVID-19 pandemic is also the notion of resilience. We have to protect ourselves not only against the virus, we also have to develop the ability to withstand a virus attack. In other words, masks are not sufficient. We need vaccines to immunize ourselves. The same is true for cyber attacks. Here too, we have to move from simple protection to immunization. We need to build IT infrastructures that have digital antibodies built in inherently to protect themselves.
And that's the way they concluded the analogy was the same analogy used at the end of this process. But I would highly recommend you go read or listen to a podcast from the Center Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney. I believe it was Wednesday or Thursday. The first segment was Kevin Freeman, who's an economic expert, and he talked about that there's this whole cyber thing coming. There's going to be a digital currency. The central banks want to introduce cryptocurrencies, and he says this is not a good thing because they'll tie it to any number of things, maybe your health profile. And so you'll be eating at a restaurant and you go to pay for it and won't let you order the food because it's, you know, we don't think you should be eating that today. What it will be is the merger of currency, digital currency, and social credit system. This is where it's going. And Kevin and I don't know whether he's a Christian or not, he just said, man, this is the mark of the beast. Very interesting. And I think Frank is a Christian. I have pretty good suspicion that Kevin is as well. But this is where it's heading. So what you see is, the analogy is Jesus said there'll be earthquakes in diverse places. And we know that that's physical. That's true. There are fault lines all over the place. You can go to the Temple Mount and walk around outside of the old city, and when you get on the eastern side of the old city, Temple Mount would be right to your back. You would turn to the Mount of Olives, and you can see a fault right down through the middle of the Mount of Olives, which is kind of interesting because it also talks in Ezekiel about water flowing from under the temple down through the Mount of Olives all the way down and sweetening the waters of the Dead Sea. That's a future prophecy. It's not been fulfilled yet. I see these videos people put up, oh, look, there's fish in this puddle by the Dead Sea. That's not listen, that prophecy says, it's going to be so deep a man won't be able to walk across it as it flows down eventually. And the whole Dead Sea, not a puddle. Okay, so let's get the prophecies right. And at least there's a natural thing that could happen there. And it talks about great earthquake. So this is happening in Canada. They had a situation where they've been finding bodies of Indigenous children that were raised in orphanages associated with a couple of churches, some Catholic churches and other denominations. And so the left is gone out and decided we're going to burn down churches, and about 10 have been burned down. Here's a 3-minute segment from Tucker Carlson discussing it the other night.
Now, we'd love to go inside Canada tonight, but we can't get there. It's like 1985 Albania. It's a closed country. So instead, we're speaking by satellite tonight to Ezra Levant with Rebel Media within Canada. He joins us now. Ezra, thanks so much for doing the show. What is going on in Canada? Serious. I mean, it's hard to believe what's happening in Canada. What is this?
Well, I'm reluctant to use the word Kristallnacht because we're not there yet. That was the night of the broken glass in pre-Holocaust Germany, where they smashed and burned and killed Jewish synagogues. It was a precursor to the Holocaust. Obviously, we are not that far gone yet. But what do you call it when literally dozens of churches are being systematically vandalized, torched? There was one fire in the BC interior that wiped out a whole village of 250 people, 2 people dead, and it is not yet determined who caused it, but it was in an area where other churches have been torched, so it may actually have its first victims. The crazy thing is this is so explicitly an anti-church hate crime wave, and yet Justin Trudeau, who is normally the first and the wokest, waited a week before saying anything, and he literally said, that's not the way to go. That was as tough as he got. He introduced an anti-hate crimes bill in Parliament that's targeting mean tweets and Facebook posts. But literally you have church after church being torched by Antifa-style terrorists, and he's almost silent on the matter, and his right-hand man finds it understandable. I think these are dark days for religious freedom in Canada.
Yeah, when they're burning churches and the head of the BC Civil Rights Commission says burn it all down? I mean, that person sounds like a dangerous lunatic. Who is that? What is going on?
And she hasn't been sacked. That was over a week ago that she said it. In fact, various board members of her Civil Liberties Association have supported her. By the way, these churches often have Aboriginal, Indigenous congregants, and they're saying, don't burn our churches down. It's the Canadian equivalent of when Black Lives Matter burns down Black-owned businesses in Black neighborhoods. That does not help Black people. In Canada, most of these churches are Aboriginal focused, and you often have, in one case, white Antifa-style vandals filming themselves desecrating a church. And the trouble is, from the very top, it's either silence or tacit support.
Yeah, and I'm ashamed to say that American Christian leaders mostly have been silent about it too, and I wish they wouldn't be. Ezra, I appreciate that report from Canada. I hope sometime to be able to visit Canada once the borders open, but in the meantime, thank you.
And here they are, 2 more. This is from Vice World News. 2 more Catholic churches have been torched in Canada amid ongoing reports of more than 1,000 unmarked graves of Indigenous children found at former residential schools. Now listen, nobody's supporting that, okay? And we don't know the whole truth of what happened or how it happened or what. But let's assume it was really bad. Do the people that go to church there today, are they responsible for that? Do you understand what Andrew Sullivan was talking about in his article and what Kevin Drum was talking about in his article? This is not coming from the right, it's coming from the left. And they're tearing it all down. So in response to the Vice World tweet about 10 churches, or 2 more churches being burned, the head of the Vancouver, it's like the equivalent of the ACLU, Harsha Walia, tweeted this. You see this, you see the thing. 2 more Catholic churches have been torched. What did she say? Burn it all down. Now, you can't find the tweet today because she's protected them, lest people actually quote her. But the internet has a pretty good memory, and you can find them. And so what's happened to her? She still has her job. She's a left-wing activist, lawyer, hack of some kind in Vancouver. And so this Erica Ifil, I think is her name, says, this seems appropriate. Burn it all down. response. This seems appropriate. But as usual, Canadian whiteness is gleefully tone policing and harassing a powerful, racialized woman from telling the truth, sending solidarity to Miss Burn It All Down. And this story is there, and Ezra Klein was right. Good article in the National Post about. The interesting thing is that when concerted missionary efforts got to Canada to share the gospel with the indigenous people there, what did they find? They were already teaching Christianity. And the only thing they could think of is like explorers who'd come in through, shared their faith with them. This is how the gospel spreads. This is how God propagates the gospel. So when professionals got there, they were already Christianized to a large extent. And they're saying, don't burn our churches down. So Justin Trudeau, he talked about Canadian Bill C-10, which was his plan to control the internet. Now, this thing failed, did not pass the Senate in Canada, so it's not law. But there's another law, I hadn't have time to research it, C-35, I think it's called, C-35, that's been introduced, that's going to do the same thing. But that doesn't stop them because the Canadian government introduced this thing called Guiding Principles on Diversity of Content Online. So they're already putting this out there, and they're asking the tech companies, would you please just sign on to this voluntarily? And this is what happens. This is what the tech companies do. The European Union introduces a hate crime legislation for online content, so they don't distinguish between the US where there's freedom and the EU where there's not. They just do the most restrictive thing because that's just easier for them to do. And so here it is. Signatories endeavor to integrate the following core values in implementing this. To restate that the guiding principles of anti-racism, anti-hate, equity, diversity, and inclusion are at the core of respect for human rights in a free and democratic society, democratic society, and globally. Then they have democracy and media freedom, recognize that the relationship between access to credible information and a broad diversity of ideas as a foundation of democratic resilience. Then equity, we talk about equity. It's not equality, it's equality of outcome is equity, not treating people equally. It's the result has to be equal regardless of effort or anything like that. Confirm that systematic barriers should be identified and remedied. This is how critical race theory and that type of thing is implemented. They're doing it on every level, everywhere you turn. Raytheon does it, Coke does it, big companies do it. Because they don't care about freedom. It's almost the very definition of fascism. Recognize that some content and ideas that may be circulated on online platforms, including hate, racial prejudice, disinformation, and misinformation, can have real and concrete consequences, and that these can be disproportionately affect indigenous people and equity-deserving groups and persons, including persons with disabilities, racialized and local communities, linguistic or religious minorities, members of the LGBTQ2+, I don't know what that one is, and gender diverse communities. Media and digital literacy for all citizens should be improved to further their ability to critically assess content they encounter. That's a big fat lie. They want you to believe what they tell you. Any measure to address disinformation and misinformation should ensure respect for the right to freedom of expression. So listen, this is where it fits into Bible prophecy, I think. The old saying, it happens gradually, then suddenly. We're sort of in that, almost into that suddenly part where it's all full blown on. Get ready for it. Miracles happen. I suppose God could change things around, but this is, anyway. And Financial Post comment, part of the National Post of Canada, the guiding principles are a broadcasting act for the internet, a set of objectives the platforms are expected to implement. The approach envisaged is systemic, organized, comprehensive, global, and subject to government regulation. A great advantage for the government is that the principles utterly bypass legislation, need no parliamentary approval, require the cooperation of the platforms but not of society, and subject large areas of private taste to algorithmic manipulation. The guiding principles, this editorial says, are creepily totalitarian. And yet one imagines the authors of this document think of themselves as being great public benefactors. Conceived as a whole, the document says that speech carried across the internet is to serve particular purposes. All speech, everywhere in the internet. Agreement or disagreement with the guiding principles as stated is less important than the whole purpose of the document. Take out the language about diversity, equity, and inclusion and replace it in a thought experiment with any other set of goals to be achieved. They could be, this is a secular newspaper. They could be the divinity of Christ, the supremacy of the Aryan race, the sanctity of the Roman Church, the triumph of scientific socialism, the grandeur of the Aztec sky god, which is used in schools in California, the preservation of the British Empire, the values of the Enlightenment. My point is not diversity, equity, and inclusion principles themselves, though they are creepy enough. It is the idea that everything online should be aimed at any guiding principle at all. So, great editorial. Here's another example of this. Los Angeles Times. You heard about the spa. Women were in an area where you don't wear clothes, and a man walks through. But it was okay because he identified as a woman, according to the spa employee. And what's wrong with you that you would be upset about that? Mrs. Mother here with your children. What's wrong with you? Where is your diversity and inclusion? To which she said, I can see that guy's junk. Here's what the Los Angeles Times in an editorial. Listen to the creepy language here. There is no doubt that we SPA did the right thing in defending the right of a transgender customer to be nude in the woman's area, even though the sight of male-appearing genitalia discomfited at least one female customer. Male-appearing? This is a major newspaper in the United States. People get paid a lot of money to write for their editorial, to work as an editor there. What's extraordinary isn't that the SPA's employees followed the law, but that this led to violence outside as opponents and supporters of the law clashed over the weekend. No, leftists attacked people who were preaching the gospel on the sidewalk where they're allowed to do that in America. Okay, let's do a little bit of Middle East. They had this bill that came up in the Knesset. Caroline Glick has a great article that she wrote in Israel Hayom a week ago. Rather than me read it to you, I'll have you read it. It's you can find it online at carolineglick.com. Reaching out is dangerous, and it talks about the fact that it's just a real mess in Israeli politics. So there was this law about family reunification and immigration from the Muslim world, and it came up for renewal. They didn't have the votes for it. The Naftali Bennett, Aya Shaked coalition with the Muslim Brotherhood and the lefties, it ended up at a vote of 59-59. Two of the Ram party, the Muslim Brotherhood party, decided not to vote. One person from Naftali Bennett's own party voted against it. And so what did Shaked and Naftali Bennett say? Likud is against Zionism. How did they come to that conclusion? What Likud proposed was a bill that would be more comprehensive and not up for annual renewal, because you get into these 59-59 votes. And you understand that at 59-59, if two people come in and vote, two more people from that 59 in the coalition that's governing switch, the government fails, and they're back to they're back to more elections. And Likud says, listen, we want a better bill, so we're going to vote against this. And then, so politics there is as nasty as politics here. So Caroline, she talks about the fact that, and this is a big article from Haaretz magazine, talking about the enigmatic revolutionary. Caroline Glick says this, Mansour Abbas, as Channel 20 reported Tuesday, earlier this week, Hassan Asfour, a senior Fatah official involved in negotiations between Fatah and Hamas, told Egyptian television that Mansour Abbas, this member of Knesset, part of the coalition, is mediating between Hamas and the Biden administration. Caroline says this, the purpose of the talks is to pave the way for formal U.S. ties to the terrorist organization. When asked, coalition partner Abbas did not deny Asfour's account. Abbas said his membership in the Bennett-Lapid government is all the proof needed to show that the government will respond positively to Palestinian demands. Like Ram Party, which Abbas heads up, Hamas is aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood. Big problem. Naftali Bennett went over to Jordan this week and had a secret meeting with, or maybe last week, had a secret meeting with King Abdullah. It's now been leaked to the press, and King Abdullah is not happy. He agreed to sell, agreed to sell a lot of water to Jordan, which is probably the most water-deprived country on the planet, particularly when they have well in excess of 1 million refugees from the Syrian civil war living in northern Jordan in camps in the desert. Water's a big problem. I know people that live in Amman, they have a cistern, they get it filled up at the beginning of the month, and if they run out, they're out till the next month comes. So you watch your water. Another interesting thing in all of this too is Qatar is a big problem. It's Muslim Brotherhood supportive. It has U.S. has transferred 3 large logistics bases from Qatar to Jordan, and this is as moving them further from Iran. This is how the Biden administration is being tough in their negotiations with the Iranians. They're capitulating to them. I probably will do another update midweek this week, talk a little bit more about the turmoil on the borders of Israel. Everything is very unstable. Lebanon is a complete meltdown. The value of the currency has dropped by 90%. I am told that a gallon of gas is running around $45 for a gallon, and people have lost 90% of the value of the money that they earn. So if you earned $800 a month, you're not living a lavish lifestyle. Remember, it was almost just about a year ago, they had that massive explosion in Beirut that killed a couple hundred people, destroyed thousands of homes. Now they have this. The political situation is complete disarray. The economy is failing. They can't form a government. Hezbollah, well, more about them in a minute. Here's what the quote from a New York Times article says. The World Bank said the financial crisis in Lebanon could rank among the world's 3 worst since the mid-1800s. The currency has lost more than 90% of its value and unemployment has skyrocketed. So let's say you were making $800, now it's worth $80, and a gallon of gas costs $46. Food prices are going up. Remember, it was a severe drought and food prices going up that really was one of the major catalysts of the Syrian civil war back in 2011. A many-year drought occurred in the area near Deir el-Zor, which is ostensibly under the control of the Americans right now. But I'll talk more about that in my midweek update about this fiction that we engage in. Like we talk about Lebanon like it's actually really a functioning country. We talk about Syria like it's actually maybe a functioning country. And it's incredibly unstable, which I think is what Hezbollah and Iran wants. This article from the Times of Israel: with Lebanon in dire straits, Hezbollah seeks to cast Iran as the country's savior. And so this is, Nasrallah was making a speech last week and still has his cough. They say he had pneumonia. Some said he had COVID. I don't know if it makes any difference. He was sick. He's a little bit better now. This is China. This is a satellite image prepared by intelligence service in Western China. There are, I think, 119 of these areas. They're missile silos. Well, that's what the intel people say. China says, no, they're wind farms. That's why we have covers over them, so you can't see the silos. While this is happening, there was this massive explosion in the port of Dubai, right near, a pretty important, the port. And the question is, who caused that? Now, Dubai's been very close to the vest about saying anything about it. They say no one was injured. They said it was a container on a container ship, but it was not too far from this building, which is the tallest building on the planet. The Burj Dubai, the Burj Al Khalifa, whatever they call it, 2,700 feet tall. So about, I don't know what they call that thing in Chicago now. I still call it the Sears Tower. I don't even know if anybody knows the name. But this building is like 1,300 feet taller than the Sears Tower. So it's a big building. They have a bigger one under connection. But the interesting part of this, back in 2017, this was tweeted by an Iranian terrorist group about flying a drone into the building and destroying it. They also tweeted pictures of the Kingdom Tower in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, destroying it with drones. And so some people were thinking that this might have been a terrorist attack. Don't know yet. We'll have to wait. The Biden administration is continuing to push for this two-state solution. And this article in the Jerusalem Post, and these newspapers, by the way, they're not monolithic. They bring in people with kind of crazy ideas at times, sometimes more often, depending on their orientation, like the New York Times. But this is one, I think this is sort of gives you the impression, this is somebody that the Biden administration would love. Jim Zuckerberg would just get all moon-eyed about this guy because he says Biden may succeed where his predecessors failed. Since it is expected that Bennett will soon visit the White House. By the way, Abdullah will be at the White House. King Abdullah of Jordan will be at the White House should be this week. And Bennett will come soon thereafter. And so when you look at Ezekiel 38 and 39 and Psalm 83, you get all these little alliances forming. There's a report out this week that Saudi Arabia wants to get in on the Abraham Accords. I think that's pretty significant. But here's a quote from the article. Since it is expected that Bennett will soon visit the White House, Biden will have the opportunity to explain to the Israeli leader in unequivocal terms that the U.S. is committed to a two-state solution, not only because it is morally correct, but because it's the only solution that will preserve the democratic nature of Israel. We'll oppose the annexation of any Palestinian territory and reject the eviction of Palestinians from their homes. And this is already happening, people. In this article, front page in the Israel Hayom newspaper, what Israel did was there was a terrorist. He lived in this house, so Israel went, and as their policy has been, they tore the house down. Now, this to Western minds, this is just horrific. And so the Biden administration is all over the Naftali Bennett. He's sort of the pretend prime minister, and then there's the prime minister in waiting, Lapid, who's the foreign minister. But they're saying this is what we do, because you have to shame people. You have to kind of like annihilate them to show them who's in charge and that they can't do this. But to the Biden administration, well, that's just terrible. So listen, if you can't, with a known terrorist, can't go in and destroy his home, now do you understand why things are out of control in a lot of Democratic-run cities in this country? It's the same principle. So, so there's this belief that they're going to do this. Financial Times reported this: U.S. Japan are conducting war games amid China tensions over Taiwan. This was picked up by Politiken in Denmark, who talked about the fact that this is happening, that we've got a potentially major war coming. Some people think it's 6 to 10 years away. Some people, I have a friend named Benjamin Baruch, who has a web, I think benjaminbaruch.net, who thinks that the war with China is getting very close, and people ought to think about it. Japan says, we're not going to let it happen. What is the Biden administration going to do? And there was a Chinese newspaper that came out and said, hey, got a 3-stage plan, and after those 3 stages, you have cruise, bombing, and then cruise missiles and some other mortar attacks, then followed by a land invasion by the Chinese Marines. And this was one of the big themes in the speech that Xi gave to the 100th anniversary celebration. I do not know why anybody would celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Communist Chinese Party, or the Chinese Communist Party, but they did. That party has been very, very bad. Caroline has another good article in today's paper, Israel Hayom, Friday's paper, talking about the U.S. military is going woke. Very good article. Read it. She analyzes it correctly and says, what does this look like to China and Iran when they're more concerned about getting people out of the military in the U.S. rather than building it up? Good article on foreign policy, Generation X's short arc of history, citing Ben Rhodes as an example of, hey, they don't understand history. Whatever's going on in the West of the United States in terms of bad weather is happening elsewhere. Iran and Iraq are having major power problems. This blank screen, one of the benefits of the high temperatures in Iraq is that this screen went blank. I mean, the temperatures are in the 120s. They don't have air conditioning. They're only having power for a few hours a day. The grid's going down. Iraq is terrible. Iran is bad too. This is the doomsday clock that they put up a few years ago to time left till the full destruction of the nation of Israel. So right now it's on hiatus. I've got a report. I'm going to wait. I'll do this in my midweek thing about the UN coming after Israeli settlements, calling them war crimes. I'll finish with this. This is Raisi, the new president of Iran, the butcher of Tehran. Go listen to Caroline Glick's podcast that was done late Thursday, early Friday, talking about this guy. This is who the Biden administration thinks they can make a deal with. He killed over 30,000 people. He had them executed. Men, women, and children. Under Islamic law, only a virgin, or Islamic doctrine, only a virgin goes to paradise. So you know what this lovely man did? He had all of the women systematically raped before they were executed. And this is the guy that Biden thinks he can make nice with and talk to. I suspect when he gets these calls, he just sort of laughs. So look, all this stuff plays into Bible prophecy. There's a lot of different lines of Bible prophecy going on. I pick up on some things, other guys that do them pick up on other things. All of them, though, point to the fact that we live at a very unique time of history. I don't know how quickly all of this is going to unfold. It seems to be going rather quickly at the time. I've been doing this in one form or another for over 20 years. I used to have a couple things a week. Now it's too much things to talk about a couple times a week. I don't think that's going to change. But listen, the same admonition that I gave at the beginning applies here. Be like Paul on Mars Hill. Stand up to this nonsense. What was it that Mike Clapham said? I didn't love it, but I liked what he said because I thought Mike Clapham said a number of years ago. What are you afraid of? The worst thing they can do is kill you. And you won that already. Act like men, stand firm in the faith. Lord, we pray that you'll help us this week to do that. Stand firm in the faith and act like men. Always ready with an answer for anyone who asks of the hope that lies within us. Help us to get those opportunities to share the gospel with people. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.